Do you have a new shrub or ornamental plant but have no idea how or when to put it in the ground? Maybe you have a plant that's already outgrown its pot for the season and you have no idea how to handle that. Or maybe you have an older, overgrown plant that needs a new home and you're not sure if it can be transplanted. In this episode, I'm going to share with you the number one planting myth and not only how, but when to plant and transplant your garden shrubs. The number one planting myth, and maybe even the number one gardening myth, is that plants should be planted in spring. In spring, we see fresh new leaves, new branches, and we think, yes, this plant made it through winter and it's finally alive. But it was always alive and the top was just dormant. So what's happening below the surface? Well, this is where all the magic is happening. Root growth, microbial activity, and plant health is all happening at this unseen level, and it's all still happening during fall and winter as the top of your plant goes dormant. During the dormant period, the roots no longer have to support all that top growth, and they can finally stretch and expand, preparing to provide additional support for even more growth next year. In a warm climate like Houston and the Gulf Coast, when our plants have an extensive season to grow in, our plants need to take a break and regroup more than anywhere else. This is why I always recommend planting woody shrubs and ornamental plants that are adapted to your hardiness zone in fall and winter instead of waiting for spring. To transplant a shrub, dig up as much of the plant and roots as possible and try to keep as much of the native soil stuck to your roots. If your roots are exposed during transplant, be more considerate of your roots by shaping your transplant hole to fit the gaps in your root system. In this example, we are creating a hill and a well for the roots of our climbing rose. This climbing rose has more top growth than root growth, so we have to prune the top before we finish transplanting. For roses, prune just above a node where the bud will face out away from the center of the plant. Now we can backfill our transplant hole with native soil. Make sure your plant is sitting upright and carefully fill in this hole so as not to create additional damage to the transplanted roots. Make sure you don't pack down the soil while filling or add soil above the root flare, which is the location the roots stop and the stem starts to grow above ground. Planting a woody ornamental plant from a pot is a much simpler process. Make sure your hole is twice the diameter of the plant pot, the bottom of the hole is flat, and test the pot in the hole before removing. Always make sure the root flare of your plant is not below the top of the ground. Gently squeeze the sides of your pot to loosen the soil so your plant pot will separate easily. Adjust your plant and planting hole so the plant sits upright and double check that your root flare will not be below ground. You can gently loosen roots along the side of the plant and then begin backfilling the hole with native soil. Make sure you don't pack down the soil while filling or add soil above the root flare. With all transplanting and new planting, make sure you water the plant well. Check the next day to make sure the soil didn't settle or roots were not accidentally exposed to the surface. I hope today's episode convinced you to plant or transplant a few things you've been waiting until spring to do. Feel free to leave your planting questions in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you can join me in the garden each week as I introduce you to new ideas and interesting plant selections just for you.